All right, everyone. I think we're going to get going with the live Q&A portion of our panel here, and Elliot and the folks at GRV are going to introduce all of us again. So I think now that the taped version of the panel is concluded, we've got the opportunity here to take some live Q&A from the audience, from the global audience. We've got people tuning in from all over the world with I'd say some pretty relevant questions to all of us here. And I'm just going to do a quick round of reintroduction since one of our panelists has changed. So we've got David Cuenca from WHO, still on with Athlie Mayo from WFP and Global Logistics Cluster, with Rishi Ramraka from IFRC, and Caitlin Burton coming to us live from I believe the launch base in Ghana for Zipline, which is fantastic. So I'd like to kind of kick things off with a couple of questions relative to cargo and asset tracking systems from the audience. So for the first one, and I think I'll just pose the question to the panel, and then we'll go down the line for quick responses. First question of the day: how useful and crucial to your operations do you think cargo and asset tracking systems are, specifically for emergency response logistics? And I'll kind of go down the line here with Rishi first. Rishi, could you come off mute and give us your take on all things transport asset tracking and then actual cargo tracking?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Robin, and good afternoon all. I think asset tracking is definitely important for us. I think we look at it in two ways. I think the first way is really around our financial commitment to donors and understanding what assets we own as an organization during operational periods and times. So we run an asset list for most of our offices, most of the equipment we buy and purchase and use for all our operations. And this can be anything from desk furniture to laptops and phones or cars or generators. So we have that type of asset requirement or asset tracking that happens on a monthly basis, reported and sort of co-managed with our finance colleagues. The second type of asset planning or asset tracking that I think you talk about is more the last mile delivery or tracking during a sort of transport period. Now with that, we don't have big need for tracking to the last mile or to the last beneficiary. So what we normally do is we track from source to final consignee or destination, and then from there we sort of hand over to our partner of choice and or our national societies who are dealing with on the ground distributions. Partly we do that is we don't have an ERP system yet up and running within the organization, which we're working on. Secondly, we find that some of that last mile distribution data collection can be very difficult when we're working through weak partners or volunteers who don't have systems or processes to follow or adhere to. But I think overall it's definitely an increasing need for all of us. I think it's very sort of needs to be transparent and accountable, and that's probably why we keep it as a recommendation or something that is growing within our field as something that's required really to show our impact or to really be able to basically report on what we do. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Robin.
Okay, thank you, Rishi. I appreciate it. Over to you, Caitlin. Can you come off mute briefly and give us your view of this? I think yours might be a very different kind of take on the same question, please.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that you don't have much of a need for last mile distribution tracking. So at Zipline, every piece of inventory that comes into the country and enters Zipline's system is barcoded. When an order comes in, all of the information about the order is captured in our database, and a barcode is basically kind of printed out and put on a box. And then every piece of inventory that goes into the box is scanned to it. And then the box is scanned to a drone, and that tells the drone where to go. So there's really never a point where a human is entering information anywhere. Nothing is self-reported, and everything is like digitally tracked in real time. And so what you have is, first of all, you have a view of where all of your supply is positioned in the region. You can see a real-time view of inventory levels at all of our regional warehouses. And then you're seeing a real-time view of what's being sent out and where. And it's incredibly complete and reliable and geographically precise. So, like what's interesting about that is, first for supply positioning and forecasting needs, that's obviously super relevant. You can see what's coming down the pike in terms of like upstream supply planning and what's coming into the country and where you're going to need to move it. But you can also see, what's being asked for in real time, and that gives you a sense of what like, health professionals or, or humanitarian response teams are dealing with in real time based on what they're asking for in real time. So we know on the medical front that that's something that we can use to tell our partners in the government, what kind of like epidemiological events they might be dealing with and where. So during the COVID crisis, that became like especially applicable, for lab samples, which isn't really humanitarian cargo, but it helped them track spread in real time, and then they could use our system to respond to it in real time by sending cargo out to where it needed to go to prepare for like an impending surge somewhere that was like hyper-localized. So we actually, once you have the capability to do very precise last mile delivery tracking, turns out there is like plenty of applications for it. Yeah.
So, and a follow-up question there is, you talked about kind of the supply chain visibility over the cargo itself, but you guys actually have physical aircraft and assets. You have to know where they are. So,
right.
So how does that differ? I mean, you talked a lot about the supply chain piece of it and cargo visibility, but the making sure you know where your actual assets are. You have airspace deconfliction, like a lot of that. Can you just briefly touch on that?
Yeah. So we have a sky map. Basically, we have flight paths that we've planned out to every single like health facility in the country, but also community level drop points. It could be a disaster zone drop point, wherever it is that we need to be making cargo available. And so those flight paths are basically kind of like a highway in the sky. You'll see these branches, these like trunks and these branches going out to all these different drop points. There's thousands of them across the country. And that is visible. The Civil Aviation Authority actually uses our software to track, all of our flights in their airspace in real time, clearing our flights with them. And so, yeah, it's you can see where dozens of pieces of inventory are going. You can see where all the assets are in the airspace.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Next on the screen here we have Athley Mayo from WFP GLC. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Robin. Hello again. To look at that last mile tracking of the relief items, from the logistics cluster perspective, there's a very specific requirement that we need to be able to address, and that's because where the logistics cluster in-country operation is providing access to services, that's for multiple partners. And it's interesting what Rishi mentioned about the the systems. Not everybody's got the same systems or at the same stage with their own respective systems. So when we have the logistics cluster operation, we need to provide a solution that all of the partners are able to access. So in two senses, it's necessary. One, for the operational management of the consignments of the relief items, so that when a partner entrusts their cargo to the logs cluster operation, they know where it is at any point in time during its journey from A to B, which might also be via CDE and on a boat, on a plane, on a truck or whatever. But equally, there's of course that element that you can use that data retrospectively to monitor and report on the operations and make sure that overall it fits into the bigger concept of operations meeting partners' needs. So as with everything in our organization, we have a nice abbreviation or acronym, and our downstream tracking tool is called RITA, and the relief items tracking application. So it's pretty much what it says on the box. It's a solution that's really accessible to all the partners. They can log on online, see where the consignment is. It can pump out a packing list with a QR code, but it's very much consignment based. Sorry about that, beginner's mistake, forgot to turn the phone off. So there you go, that's RITA, which is our downstream thing.
Got it, okay, makes sense. David, to you, WHO, at the regional level, how do you guys feel about this? And come off mute, please. There we go.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. Actually, from our side, we have also two kind of tracking system. One was asset management, which is all the valuable assets we have for our own use, etc. This is quite important in terms of accountability and transparency also, and to manage this also over the time, because some assets are getting used or made or lost, etc. So all this is quite important to have, but it is kind of internal management of our assets. Then when it comes to supply for operations and partners, with regard to the last mile, as Rishi was saying, actually we are accountable till we hand over to the partner or the member state using these kits or supplies or medical supplies. Of course, we formalize this with a donation certificate in order to formalize this handover. And then we support them if requested for the last mile delivery. Sometimes it's through partners such as the logistic cluster or WFP or whoever else is present in the country. And when it comes to the let's say the international part of the supply chain, and there will be from our experience with the CSCS and the COVID response. Actually, this was a joint venture in between several partners where each of us were taking part of a specific part of the supply chain. So we had some, and we built this while the boat was already sailing, as we say among us. So actually, we adapted some existing tools and database, etc. Actually designed for managing 1 or 2 or 3 big emergency to something global and with an amazing volume to manage. So by itself, it was quite a challenge. But then also because different partners were in charge of the different part of the supply chain, then we had to combine them or to make sure that these different pieces of data management were talking each other and were bridging each other. So actually was quite feasible and not so challenging, but it required to invest a lot also in the end user in order for them to be familiar with the different tools, the different database, what to use to track what, etc. So from our side also, we have invested a lot in this part of capacity building and equipping partners at country level, starting from Ministry of Health and other partners using the CSCS. CSCS commonly known as the UN portal.
Yeah.
And also when it comes to tracking, one important part is not only to track your own supplies or your own pipeline, but it's also to have visibility on the pipeline from other stakeholders, because actually this helps a lot to determine what are the real gaps at the country level, and for you to anticipate or to forecast how you could fill gaps or how you could anticipate some needs. Well, maybe this is part of another discussion or other question, but the data sharing and how to use them is also something quite challenging at country level.
Okay, thank you, David. So actually, the next question we've got in the chain here is closely related to what we just talked about. We're going to back out and talk about data a little bit. Let's see. What were the main challenges in terms of procurement planning that you ran into in your involvement in COVID-19 response in Africa so far? So all things procurement, we've talked about asset tracking and cargo tracking. And I think just from a procurement planning perspective, from local to global, what were either the challenges that you experienced specifically, directly, or what did you see in the environment as you were getting into it? So we're going to start with Rishi again. Could you come off mute, sir, please, and give us your input?
Okay, great. Thanks for that question. I think for us, we had, I think, 3 main challenges with the whole COVID onset. I think the first one was really the routings to Africa drastically reduced. So suddenly we found that, the 49 countries we supplied to, maybe only 4 or 5 of them were actually letting any cargo and or people into the country. Suddenly borders were closed, and our day-to-day sort of normal courier services and the like were really not working. So we had a huge, I think, task in terms of transport options, and that caused a lot of panic and difficulty in planning. So we had to look at a lot of local sourcing and change our literally our procurement planning. The second thing we found was there was a lot of absence of the people we needed. both at customs facilities at the airports, at the state offices. So we couldn't find the right people to get the privileges, get the documents signed, and this was also delaying the whole process in terms of just the customs clearance on arrival, I guess. And then finally was just the complications, I think, of the PPE and the certain requirements of such cargo with regards to certificates of conformity, whether they are medical health, within the Ministry of Health, I guess approved drug list or consumable list that were coming into the country. And because PPE was so new to us, there were some things that just took longer in terms of getting the correct paperwork, sharing it, getting again, delaying on the clearances and customs process. So I guess those are my three top challenges with the whole COVID response. I mean, I could go on with regards to local sort of distribution. And then, of course, there was many challenges with partners and how we managed through partners to distribute, because we got a lot of free PPE. And then, of course, in country, how did we distribute, and to which partner did we distribute? So I'll stop there. Over.
Okay, thanks, Rishi. And to you, David, next on the screen. And please off mute as well. That's okay.
Sorry.
There we go. So procurement, your largest challenges.
Okay. Well, actually, for us, the most critical part was last year, beginning of the COVID outbreak, because all of the border closure, plane staying on the ground, etc. And on that time, we were actually kind of preparing countries in the region for COVID, because it was just the very beginning. And in all this effort, we have been stopped suddenly because of all that. So for us, it implied to find some ad hoc solution and what we call the creative solution to reach the countries. For instance, in terms of lab equipment, we were working on that time to increase the capacity in the region from 2 countries having the capacity to test COVID to 47 countries. So it was quite critical on that time to do this. And what we did actually is kind of, I don't know how to explain this, but creating some small hub here and there, trying to join cargoes, to air freight some cargoes, etc. And one challenge we had doing this is our own suppliers were not really comfortable or confident with the setup we had, because it was kind of, as I was saying, creative and ad hoc solutions just to reach this particular country. And it implied for us also to take over the reliability they had and to assume some risk and responsibility in order to reach these countries, taking into account that we were talking about life-saving items, etc. So we were really willing to assume this responsibility, and this is actually what we did. Then also we worked for PPs, for instance, we worked with WFP to set solidarity flight, which was covering from Addis Ababa, 54 countries, where we distributed the first consignment of PPE countries were receiving, and we also joined this with JACMA donation, providing some lab testing, etc. So this was a kind of very useful, I think, joint venture in between different partners, and I'm naming also Africa CDC on that, building from the country office capacities that WFP had in Ethiopia. And all this to highlight this kind of important role that coordination and complementarity in between partner plays in this kind of very difficult context. Because by joining our expertise, our forces, our resources, etc., we have been able to address some critical challenges when it seemed that no solution were feasible.
Okay, awesome, David. Thank you for the input. And Athlete, to you for kind of the other, I guess the other side of that coin, how did you view the same challenges David was talking about in terms of procurement and gaps, and maybe maybe pick one that you thought was rather acute and tell us how it was solved.
Mhm.
If it was, it's not, they're not all solved yet. So it's
Sure, and I think I mean, to start off by saying that the logs cluster and that approach, one headache that we didn't have to contend with was the procurement of the commodities, which, as David was explaining, this enormous machine that was set up to have that end-to-end visibility of the supply chain for the commodities needed for the COVID response. So as the logs cluster doesn't engage in the procurement of commodities, we didn't see the pain at the country level that David's describing, this incredible need for flexibility and agility in responding to have the setup there. But of course, all those issues that Rishi and David are touching upon there, the impact on the transport and the supply chains for all of the other humanitarian relief items, was a huge factor for partners. And I think, Rishi, it was you who mentioned the need for having pipeline visibility when you're trying to manage your in-country operations, and the complete unpredictability as the upstream markets were impacted by COVID-19, of course, has a knock-on effect on the in-country logs cluster operations. And at a global and regional level, there was, you have all of that data and information that's required for the health response, and equally the impact on the other humanitarian operations that are trying to keep their operations going. For them as well, every bit of information on customs changes, on border crossing stoppages, pile-ups at the ports, etc., was equally critical. And I think also, David, you alluded to it there as well. It's in some locations, every location had a different, you need to adapt according to what the capacity is in country. So of course, in certain countries, the logs cluster in-country operation was fitting inside that bigger machine, and understanding the collaborations and the complementarities, and making sure there's a seamless plug-in to that bigger system. I think, David, you'll agree with me, it was a learning experience for everybody. Nobody had been through this before. There were no blueprints for it at global level, perhaps regional experiences, of course, but understand and trying to have that seamless end-to-end right down to the last mile. I think that was a very interesting learning experience about how we have that all-informed complementarity and linkage between the different systems, because of course in an end-to-end thing like that, there's going to be multiple stakeholders involved. I didn't answer your question at all, did I, Robin? Sorry, I got distracted.
It was enlightening, nonetheless. It's okay. I'd just like to go to Kaylin, because our time's running short. Just for very quick comments. I know you at Zipline, you guys aren't involved directly in procurement of the commodities, but what challenges did you see to the procurement systems that you've been working with, and perhaps how did you interact with them, very, very briefly? Then we've got one lightning round and we'll close things up.
Yeah, I would just say that, by helping them understand where supply is and how fast it's being consumed, and where, we are helping all of the different regions, and then also the national level, adjust their procurement in pretty fast time. Some of these commodities can come in, on really short timelines. So helping them understand when it comes, like how much they should be bringing in, and then when it comes in, where it should be going based on their levels of depleting, is something that I think we add a lot of value to in real time.
And still probably learning as you go with your partners.
For sure. Yeah, and I think there's also just on these SOPs, how do we keep routine supply chains running and emergency supply chains running at the same time that we have big surges coming in of like COVID vaccines, for example. That requires a lot of, not retraining or anything. It's more like we have to figure out really fast adjustments to our system to make sure that we're making room for everything and it can work fast enough. So it's been a lot of learning on the job.
All right, so a lot of time management adjustment, a lot of priority management adjustment. Got it. Okay, and that's I think that all the panelists could agree that expands to the global level. As you get bigger, it only gets messier and more complicated. Okay, so lightning round. We've only got about 6 minutes left, and just to kind of recock our viewpoints and our outlook here. Looking forward to the future. If you could pick one challenge, what is going to be the biggest challenge that you see to the logistics and supply chain piece of COVID response going forward from here? Where do you think the biggest gap is? Where do you think the biggest challenge is? And what do we need to be thinking about? So lightning round, got about 30 seconds each. And Rishi, I'm going to put you on the spot again as the first one out of the gate. So if you could come off mute and give us what's the next big thing we all need to be thinking about.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I think the next thing for me would be how can we work better together? You know, there needs to be a lot more interoperability. I feel we're all in our own silos. I think donors have to put more pressure on us as actors to work together to be more efficient and I think cost effective, because we all have our own little supply chains. How can we come together and reduce this? You know, I think it'll have good impact on the green. It'll have better oversight on our coordination and you know, awareness of what's there. So I really think we have to be pushed as actors to come and work more closer together, and we need to share some of the privileges we all have within this sector so that, you know, we can get quicker and better and respond faster. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Rishi. David, to you, sir.
I think one main challenge is related to quantification or forecasting of needs, actually, because this is the starting point to have a fluid supply chain and also to start to anticipate and to have a regular flow of supplies. It was difficult because actually, despite the fact of developing tools for forecasting, etc., this required the involvement of different technical expertise and also the right level of validation in the data to be inputted. And then what we have seen also is that the needs were actually so huge that finally the demand was driven by the funding available, not necessarily on the need identified at country level. So this is also something important to take into account. And even one another challenge in this kind of exercise is actually to have visibility of the whole pipeline for a country. Because if you want to be accurate in your quantification, you actually need to know what is in the pipeline from the different stakeholders, etc., in order to properly identify what is the real gap. Otherwise, you just have a partial view on that, and you might be misled also. And to have access or this transparency in between the different stakeholders to share what is actually in their stock at country level or what is in the pipeline, etc., it's also very challenging, and it requires to have a proper mechanism for coordination at country level, because this can be done only at country level. It's difficult from a regional or global level to have this full visibility. So to have in place this kind of coordination mechanism, this trust also among partners to share data and to put everything on the table and to join forces, etc., and then to equip this with the appropriate tools and database management, etc. It's, I think, quite critical. Knowing that one of the challenge when it comes to put data together is that actually to match the different database we might be using, etc. So the IT part behind this is also quite critical and presents some technical challenges. Yeah.
I think, David, you've identified 6 or 7 of the largest challenges that we all have to get after as we go forward in this marathon. So, Athlete, to you for very quick thoughts.
Super quick from my side. I think the challenge is, can we move from identifying lessons to learning from the lessons and implementing? Because there's a whole range of experiences, but I don't know how everybody else feels, but we always struggle to come up for air, to take the time to take stock and make sure that we're ready for the next one before it lands on top of us. So I think perhaps that's, from my perspective, is how can we really surge the time and resources to learn from this time around so we're ready for the next.
And how do we consciously invest in that learning process and the resources needed to capture the information? Agreed, totally agreed. We seem to reinvent the wheel every single time, and at this time we have to do it at the global level, and we can't miss the opportunity all this knowledge that's coming at us has if we really capture it for the next one. True. And Caitlin, to close with you just briefly, next challenges, next big gap, what's the next thing we need to think of?
I actually think I agree with Rishi. We need a lot more integration. we've been, like Zipline is kind of in a bubble here. We're like a hyper efficient private sector player. That's our whole job is to make supply chain performance as cost effective and fast as as possible. But we've been kind of surprised during the pandemic. I just met with a partner the other day who is conducting a cold chain audit in the country in Ghana, where I am right now. But we've participated in like 5 cold chain audits in the last, like 6 months ago. And this is just being done again. And then some new investments that we made in some kind of parallel structure, and it's very uncoordinated at the development partners level. And so, I think that the more that can come together and improve on the coordination front, the more data can be shared, the more, I think the more efficient the whole supply chain will become, and the government will probably be able to respond a lot better when they don't have so many development partners that are not really coordinated on their end, forcing them to respond to it.
Yep, agreed. So more streamlined in terms of regulatory issues and how to make one solution work for everybody. That makes a lot of sense. And we'll see it in Ghana. I know you're going to Nigeria next. We'll see it there, and it's just going to be wash, rinse, repeat every time. Well, thank you. We're actually a little bit past time, and I really appreciate everybody's in-depth insight and responses to all the questions we've had from the panel, on the recorded piece, and then this live piece. I really appreciate your time and attention. So Caitlin, Athlete, Rishi, David, thank you for tuning in from all over the world. And thank you again to the audience out there for tuning in and listening to us. And we wish you a lovely afternoon or evening wherever you are, and a good rest of the conference. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.